Jacob, welcome.
Daniel, thank you.
A pleasure to be connecting again. We've had a couple of these conversations now over what must be the years, although it does sometimes feel like the months, because everything seems to telescope in both directions these days.
Yeah, it's one of my great pleasures to have these kinds of little relationships and dialogues that weave on and on over the course of years. And you were, of course, and will always be my first ever guest on Sense Based Podcast.
Oh, well, yeah, I was honored.
I will say that conversation led to the start of a relationship with somebody who watched that podcast. So it's you've woven yourself in and out of my life, and I always enjoy returning to these conversations.
Oh, it's a pleasure to talk to you too, especially in light of our more recent interactions through discussions we were having in various formats over electronic media in the last few months with a group of men talking about the title of the group was Embracing Change. So how we were, quite willingly opening ourselves up to the possibility of something transformative and encouraging, supporting, nurturing, at times even challenging each other to, really go for that. And that was a really enriching experience. And I'd like to perhaps touch on some of what came out of that in our conversation. But I think
that would be really good. It definitely, the men's work is so powerful, and it felt like there's that process of kind of going from back here to like dipping our toes in a little bit into the space, sharing a bit more, engaging a bit more, getting into the mutual vulnerability that makes possible some change happening in that wee space. And we certainly got past dipping our toes in that group, I think. And I was really grateful for that.
And I was quite inspired to discover the potential of it. You may remember, I think I wrote something about it right at the beginning when I was first coordinating the idea of the group with Matt, that I really found the idea of coming together in a men's group something that had not really spoken to me before, and in fact that I'd actually actively avoided. And I think spending time with other men, being open, being vulnerable, and having the kind of communication that I'd previously really only had with a few very close friends, and even then only relatively occasionally with a bunch of relative strangers repeatedly and often, was really eye-opening and empowering, heart-opening, I would say, as well, in a way that I really hadn't expected.
Yeah, it's kind of a Rebel Wisdom used to talk about vitamin M, vitamin masculinity, that there was this vitamin that we could discover that was really nourishing that we hadn't had before. And that was definitely my experience getting into it, of like discovering something that was it's like that feeling of finding something that feels like there's a sense of belonging to it, and not like, oh, I've been lost and wandering and I found my cult. Like this has there's an embodied reality to the communion of men that calls forth a certain energy and participation from you as a man, where you feel like, oh, this is something that feels quite natural and that I've been missing. And then as soon as you experience that, there's almost like a sort of realization of like, oh, why is that the case? Why is that not already there in culture? Why haven't I been initiated as a young man by a group of elder young men who've taken me out on this initiation process? Or why don't I have these kinds of men's circles of care and accountability and mutual mentorship and all of this stuff? And I think it can be an alchemical space for men, combining the manliness, let's say the traditional manliness with the vulnerability and introspection. It's an interesting edge space?
I mean, I suppose this is happening, much more widely among women. There's a prevalence of women's groups, women's circles, in a way that you don't really find so much amongst men, although that's happening a lot more often. I think there was a wave of this stuff, perhaps in the previous generation, and to a certain extent, that gave it, in my mind, a bit of its bad name, wild man, tame the warrior, that kind of thing, and I always felt like that's not really me, and I just happy being a human. I happen to, be biologically male, but happy to just be a person. And so I suppose in this, spirit of dialogue, exploring beyond, fixed positions and even perhaps, two mutually opposing perspectives. I wonder, where does the sort of the boundary between what we might talk of as a men's group or work amongst men, or even men's work, just sort of dissolve into being a human being, but just exploring what it means to be human with other men?
Interesting. I thought where you were leading with that was just being a human being with a mixed group, because of course I've participated in dialogue groups of a kind of dialogos, emergent dialogue exploration flavor with men, and kind of like a men's group one. And I've been really interested in that combo, but I've also done it with these mixed groups with women, with sort of elder women as well. And yeah, it's not a totally clear boundary to me. It's definitely a blurred edge, and I definitely see benefit in both. Gosh, there's a depth to that question of like, okay, we get a group of men together as a men's dialogue group. What is it about that makes it a men's dialogue group and not just a people dialogue group? And I'm actually quite hesitant to attack that head on or in any linear fashion, because it feels like actually part of what this new men's movement is bringing the feminine into that space. It's not merely about reclaiming masculinity, it's about this integration of the feminine. And perhaps that's also why there's so many women's circles and various kinds of things cropping up, is women also have a desire to commune in the feminine space, and in the safety of that is often what I've heard talked about. And so I'm intentionally invoking the feminine here because it's not, I think that to try and boil down the essence of what makes a man's space in a really manly, straightforward way is not particularly what it's about. It's actually men being in a space of sensitivity, of curiosity, of exploration, and male energy, male sexuality, male dynamics, male rivalry, male ways in which men relate to each other that look like rivalry but are actually friendship, or things that look like friendship that are actually rivalry, and all of these subtleties to male relationship that make it up. So I hope that wasn't a dodge.
No,
but
I mean, it's a really difficult question to grapple with, and I really raise it because Matt and I were trying to discuss it and almost found it impossible to discuss. He's had a lot more experience than me with men's groups, and was quite keen actually to use the phrase men's work, and I had a real visceral kind of reaction against that as a phrase. For me, it sort of conjured up all sorts of negative connotations about the nature of the group we might be putting together. And I was also quite keen to make clear that we weren't really going to talk about what it meant to be a man. We were just going to talk about what we were trying to face in our lives with other men. And I suppose that's where the question came from, this place of, at the same time, realizing that perhaps that in itself ducked the question, from the point of view of not actually making it clear in the framing of the group. And I suppose, in some ways, I'm reluctant to run headfirst into the modern culture war context of distinctions between sex and gender, and the ways in which things may or may not be as fluid as some wish that others would acknowledge that they were, and the very sort of nature of the discussion a lot of the time involving a lot of fixed positions and antipathy to understanding the other's perspective, except in terms of the most extreme way of characterizing it so that you can belittle it. And so obviously anything I might say it lends itself to that happening. So I'm wary from that point of view. But I suppose I'll be honest. I think there are different layers of things going on. You alluded to sexuality. Then there is also the idea of how we feel, and I'm not sure that's really an essentialized thing. Being a man or being a woman. I think there are just an enormous number of different potentialities. So you can imagine it like an enormous mixing desk in a music studio with these sliders that can go up and down, and almost none of them are whacked up to 11 Spinal Tap style or right down at the bottom of the chart. There's just this complicated graphic equalizer setting on all of these potentialities, and people who would think of themselves very strongly as masculine, and others who might think of themselves having a more feminine persuasion, while still thinking of themselves as biologically male, and perhaps then orienting their sexuality in relation to men or not men, would still be so overlapping with others who were female and yet thinking of themselves as feminine or masculine that it becomes very difficult to categorize this idea of who we are. So the two things that seem to be a bit more categorizable are which body bits you're born with and who you want to sleep with. But even then, there's a lot of kind of increasing flexibility around those things that gets into the conversation, makes it difficult. So I guess I just wanted to park all that and not go there. And as I say, just to be with other men talking about life. And I then wondered, have we missed something? was there something that would have come together had we said this is a men's group? We're going to think about what it means to be a man in the 21st century, in the midst of all of that stuff that's enormously complicated that I can't possibly do justice to, except from my perspective right here, right now, in this moment. And so I don't know.
Did we need to beat our chests a little bit more or something?
Well, maybe I don't know. I not having done that, having run a mile from it since I used to play rugby and went out and drinking with laddish lads and being ever so kind of ostentatiously insecure about their masculinity in public, I kind of decided I didn't really need any of that.
Yeah, I'm really hearing that this is something you've kind of grappled with or contended with over a longer period of your life, and that's relevant, that's important nutrition for this dialogue. It's not an aside to me. It's somehow like the working out of that for you is essential to what it is the conversation is about, and also that culture war energy, that sort of dark cloud of that causes a contraction in our speaking freely, something that I've contended with, but I think that we can dispel, mostly because people don't really care that much to go after anybody like us, and an unexamined life isn't worth living. So
that's my philosophy. In that sense, I'm happy to talk about what I feel, and
I think it's less about it's less like, oh, I can't say what I want to say. It's more, are we going to let the conversation we have and how we have it be shaped by that, not in the sense of just shutting it down, but shaping the plane on which it's happening, shaping the dimensions of the conversation, and so on. And we don't need to do that. And so there's a number of things you said that I wanted to pick up on to kind of open this out a little bit. And the first one is, which one's the first one? There's a couple. Well, first and foremost, I've been in a number of men's groups over the years, and I have found that they're not necessarily characterized by a traditional boyish masculinity. A number of groups I've been in have had a couple of gay guys and a couple of straight guys, and like very diverse sexual dispositions, but all sort of drawn together perhaps around this more like philosophical curiosity or self-development curiosity or something like that. And so that immediately kind of has refuted the sense that it's about a particular kind of male sexuality. And I think just by virtue of being in dialogue and being in exploration and being in philosophy, it can also draw in men who are in touch with that feminine aspect or are curious to cultivate the feminine, and not meaning pink stuff and fragrant perfume or things like that, but rather, you know, the noumenal, the unnameable, the things that we can sense but we can't distill into boxes, and the capacity for fluidity and connection with others and things of that nature, I would kind of characterize as feminine. And so I was having this conversation recently. You know, I've been delving into Christianity and trying to wrestle with that, and wrestling with this question, like, am I Christian now that I'm, you know, delving into all this stuff? And where we got to in that dialogue was quite interesting. One of the participants said, basically, what it means to be Christian is to be wrestling with what it means to be Christian, rather than like a particular doctrinal thing. And so if we kind of take that and bring it here, perhaps what it means to be a man is something that's emerging through the process of grappling with what it means to be a man. And so it's not necessarily like there's a set answer, but if we take that word, if we bring it in, there's a couple of things that can happen. One is perhaps it can give a bit more power to that, rather than just like, what does it mean to be human? What does it mean to be a man? I think there is ways in which that word invokes, it's got like an invocational energy that might enable taking of more responsibility, or you know, there's a really positive rooted kind of masculine essence that people can get in touch with, which actually allows them to show up in a way that is in leadership of their own lives, or in leadership in society, in support of, you know, the kind of person that makes a good partner to their female counterpart, if, you know, if they're heterosexual man.
Well, I guess that's where my questions start to come up, as to whether there is such a thing as a masculine essence, and if so, if it's got anything to do with any particular qualities, and therefore, if it doesn't, whether we might be better off talking about the leadership essence and accepting that it might not be equally present in all people, but that it's certainly present in lots of people who don't necessarily fall under the category of man, and also that there are plenty of men who don't seem to show it very much. So I guess that's where things start to get a bit slippery sometimes when I look at it. And for me, what seems most powerful in what you were just talking about there is just the invitation to step fully into being who I am, whether or not the word man is a particularly anchoring concept in that. I mean, I am a man, so I can't really escape that. I'm not looking to, but I realize as soon as I start talking about this stuff that I've had a very checkered relationship with being a man. I I used to get surprised when I would hear people on public transport telling their children, watch out for that man, and turn around, which one? Where is he? Or me? Well, I guess I felt like an overgrown child rather than an adult in some ways when I was younger, and so from that side, didn't feel particularly manly. Not always had the easiest relationship with my father. I think I was always looking for a stronger male role model, and found myself therefore pushing against authority figures to see if they would actually, stand up to me and be, on the one hand, authoritative, and on the other hand, deserving of respect. And continually knocking over these various characters as I went through my professional life, deeming them not worthy, while at the same time undermining them and making a fool of myself. So all of that's gone on in the background, with a sort of, I guess, rather Holden Caulfield-like quest to see through all the phonies while being one myself, and carrying on being an overgrown teenager well into my 30s. And in more recent years, I've got a bit more of a grip on all of that, and in some ways have at the same time loosened my grip around it and just tried to be who I am. And so coming into a space where people are actually just inviting me to be who I am, but with a very strong grounded energy, and whether or not we can say that's essentially male, that was what I found really appealing about the space that we were both part of, was that there was a really deep felt sense that everything was welcome, and that there was the capacity to handle it, whatever it was. And a lot of things, I think, not just for me, but for others, bubbled up that we weren't expecting, and found ourselves, perhaps oversharing, even to the extent of wondering, should I have said all that to people I don't really know? But the supportive reality of just being heard, being listened to, and being affirmed through being heard by strong, centered people who are doing their best to be, meditatively present to what's happening right in front of them. Yeah, that's powerful. And it so happened we were all men, and so that took, I guess, for me, a particular character, in that it embodied something very positive about manliness, because there were all these men manifesting those qualities. So whether or not they were essential to men, having them affirmed by other men to me as a man was empowering.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that really resonates with my first experience of being in a all men's space, and what that kind of like felt like. And yeah, I think what's coming through for me is the feeling of, like, how to put this, whether or not however you engage with what it means to be a man, if you grow up in this culture and civilization, that's with you in some sense. We all have stuff. We all have brothers and fathers and role models, or the absence of role models, as boys growing into men. And so there's something about an all men's space which offers the particular container in which those aspects, that part of the holographic self, that matrix of manhood, can be worked out, and I would say only worked out in relationship to the thing that it's related to, which is our relationships to men and what it means to be a man. And so again, not about an end destination or a particular outcome, apart from knowing thyself and hopefully growing. That's not necessarily going to happen. And a lot of the challenge becomes that, in the absence of the male spaces, the male support networks, the male mutual mentorship, and all of that, then all of the male stuff gets brought only into the relationships with the females, and therein you get the recipe for all kinds of trouble, basically, because we have all generations of emotional difficulties and traumas and attachment issues and we all need to grow and become ourselves through interaction with the world, and all of this ends up falling on the shoulders of the women. And I don't think that's a recipe for particular health. And part of the kind of mantra of my men's journey was seeing, that not going well in the context of me not having that kind of male support context around me. And so after that, I always thought to myself, well, this stuff's always hard, but going through it with a male man around makes a hell of a lot of difference. And you have to kind of be sometimes let down by what's there to really appreciate it. So, and there's a whole other thread opening up here of just the historical. There's so much we can get into about historical context of what it means to be a man as well.
Sure.
But I think there's a hardwired necessity of relationship recognition, affirmation, sensing our value and worth in a relational context. That to me is undeniable. And the part that may be in question but feels true to me is that there's a particular male to male aspect of that for males, in relationship to peers and in relationship sort of a bit more vertically to older males as well, to have that. And I believe there may also be something with older females, like a very particular aspect of self that can only be nourished by that kind of relationship. But those two things can be different and distinct, and they feel different and distinct. And I feel I'm on a journey of self DIY initiation, and finding those relationships organically out there with older men, with men who are my peers, and being on that kind of journey together. And as those relationships deepen and unfold, then they're mutually catalytic. And I think that's what we were starting to feel into in embracing change, was that simply having that intentionality, openness, and bringing the intensity and reality of our lives together to interact, it creates and unleashes energies, and we get to bring forward parts that are yearning to be voiced. And then in voicing them, we become potentially more of ourselves, or more freely ourselves, or something like that.
I think then we also develop the capacity to tend to that side of our nature consciously, and perhaps in relationship to other men. And if I look back 20 plus years into my past, I would often enter into relationships with women that I had no real intention of being in, with the intention of getting emotional support and being dependent on their presence to get the emotional support. So having to keep the pot boiling just enough that they didn't tell me where to get off. And yet at the same time, not fully investing in what they were more interested in me committing to than I was. Not necessarily because I thought I was that great. They were just looking for a relationship, and I was stringing them along. And, I look back on that with a certain amount of shame, especially if I characterize it in that way. But, I was just struggling to find resources to feel okay with being alive, frankly. And I found that was something that women were willing to offer me, and that I knew how to get from women, and I just didn't know how to get it from men. And
I just want to say, like, God bless them for the willingness to do it. Like, I don't think it's particularly balanced right now, but they women in our lives are holding so much of the fabric of life together.
Yeah.
And I'm so thankful for that, even though it's very messy.
Indeed. And if as you were saying, men can be better resourced to provide something comparable, that's surely got to be for the good of society at large. But also, especially if men are better equipped at looking after, cleaning up their own messes and taking care of themselves and feeling more centered in themselves, they're probably going to make for better partners and parents and whatever else it may be along the way as well. So that's a beneficial investment in just coming more fully into being who we are in and of itself. So. Clearly there's value to this. And I suppose my only resistance was I had the sense that a lot of men's work, in inverted commas, would be structured along a particular path with particular goals, and this initiation or mentorship would take a particular form. And thinking back to books like Iron John and just thinking, well, that's all very well, but we're so different, all of these people who are men. Is there really one thing that all men need other than just to be heard and allowed to express themselves in a way that enables them to really start to feel better connected to who they are and perhaps better capable of following through on their intentions?
Yeah, and that kind of evokes for me also the inverse of that, of I guess of what we're finding available now. The inverse that I hear you responding to is like if we're like postmodern, metamodern, modern, and pre-modern, in which it's fundamentally about stamping out. There's that stamping out of difference that kind of characterized culture and society, but ultimately propagated by and within the intramasculine web. I find this word patriarchy is misused and overused in various ways, but there's clearly some essence that it does point to, and
sure,
and that's that the way that men related to themselves and others, and then to women, and all of that,
organized society for their own benefit to a certain extent.
Yeah, and so that's the shadow that we live under, basically, and marching off to war, or maybe not war, but some other kind of context in which men are going off and doing things that they oughtn't be doing because it's enabled and conformed to the masculine ideal. And just on the other hand, I know I'm weaving a lot of threads into this this sweater that we're yarning here, but I listen a lot to like Aubrey Marcus and some of the discourses around his podcast, and they're kind of a little bit new age spiritual in some way, but they talk a lot about masculine feminine dynamics, and part of what's said there is that there's something essential about the rooted masculine that is enabling of the flourishing of the feminine for the female, and that where men's masculinity is insecure or unrooted, or we find ourselves in these high dependencies, which I'm 100% guilty of, that there's because the women are having to like hold that together and then like assume in some ways a more masculine role, or holding pieces that aren't really theirs to hold, then what happens is there's parts of their fully becoming themselves that are not being allowed to happen. And we can see like broadly in culture, there's this talk of like the rise of the feminine, or the re-emergence of the feminine, and how does that actually happen? It's got to be like women being afforded the space and support to actually get down deep into knowing themselves and following their intuition and all of that stuff. And they can't do that if they're kind of like we're all in this mutual holding pattern that we can't. It's like how does one person grow beyond it whilst the other, and there's this almost paradoxical way that we get stuck, but change is happening and we are growing through, and there's a long way to go as well. Like, I've been speaking to the values of men's work and participating in, when I say men's work, what I really mean is men's fellowship, dialogue, group journeys. And I've been doing that for years and years, and there are still like really core essential things that I'm only learning now, like coming out of this last relationship that I was in. There's aspects of my masculine rootedness, my independence, that are only just coming into the forefront now. And it's such a testing journey to get there, and we can't skip ahead. And we need to go through the difficult relationships that we go through and learn the lessons that we need to learn to like have that breakthrough and break out, and then die and be reborn to get to the next place. And but then when we do that, we can hold a little bit more than we could before, and that's enabling for ourselves and for others, and for the whole fabric of life in which we're participants. And if that's not what the spiritual philosophical journey is about ultimately, then I don't know what is.
Well, that's a very good place to dive into some of the broader questions as they relate to yoga, I think, because the whole structure of yoga philosophy in Sanskrit language text is gendered, and there are qualities that are basically described by masculine and feminine gendered nouns that interact and that have to sort of come together into some sort of integrated whole in some philosophies, or be distinguished and detached from one another in other philosophies. And there's a lot of reaction against that right now in the yoga world, as people get swept up in various currents of ideas of the way things should be. But I always come back to the way that things are, which is reality. We live in a world that is by and large, bi-gendered, sort of in this way, has this binary in sexual terms, in terms of biological sex, and that things come together that way. But also there's other ways in which things come together too. There's infinite variety, but that there is still this sort of spectrum of possibility that somehow folds back into itself, is often the philosophy of yoga. So there's this interplay in the tantric aspects which have influenced physical yoga practice, between the material world, which is sort of energetically alive, and the conscious principle of the transcendent. And somehow the two are interdependent. One would just sort of not be embodied otherwise, and the other would not be awake. So somehow they have to have this interdependent relationship. So to see it as in any way sort of one subordinate to the other is, I think, philosophically speaking, wrong. Although there is sometimes the suggestion that the feminine is in service of the ultimate transcendent masculine of the pure state of consciousness, which is in many systems identified with a masculine noun. So people tend to kick back against that. But actually, the basic message is the interdependence. And I think coming back to what we were talking about more broadly about society at large being a man and everything else, if we were better tuned in to our interdependence, I think a lot of the problems that the world has would seem a little bit more, whether solvable or not, I don't know, but negotiable, because there's often this sense of we need to just figure out who's wrong and then figure out who's right and use the people who are right to vanquish the ones who are wrong, and that somehow that will magically fix everything. Whereas we're just this web of interconnected things that are very difficult to pin down. We move around all the time. Everything's changing. My ideas are not the same as they were yesterday. My body isn't the same as it was yesterday. My idea of myself as a man is going to be very different in 10 years' time, I'm sure. And so all of this is happening just here right now for me, but it's happening for everybody. Billions of people having this constant vibration going on. And so I think sometimes what I feel drawn to is to see the world in terms of intersecting spectrums. So I had that image earlier of the mixing desk with the sliders and everything sort of, potentially rearranging, but that's also a 3-dimensional shape.
Yeah.
And those different mixing desks are all, interconnected with each other. and somehow what you adjust in one will also affect what's going on in the other. And that's our web of relationships.
Yeah.
And things can reverberate through that, many thousands of stages removed. So I become less and less interested in the two sort of aspects of the binary, and much more interested in the ways in which things along the spectrum relate to each other. I suppose that's why I was trying to talk about, what it is to be a man in terms of this rather fluid mixture of combinations of potentials that can take all sorts of forms that might map on to what somebody who's thinking of themselves as a woman might also look like on the chart. And so I wonder if we were to see it in that degree of complexity, if it would seem, in some ways, that everything was a bit less simple, and therefore these simplistic pseudo solutions would be a little less beguiling. And instead, we just have to try and get better at tuning into ourselves and each other.
Yeah. I really love that imagery. It's a very tactile metaphor of the correspondent mixing boards, and you could imagine all of those little knobs and sliders are like elements of self, aspects of self expression, self knowing, and so on. And what I love about it is that the notion that, okay, I could shift, if one like slider is shifted in me just a little bit, then my relationship to life, and therefore the relationships in my life or that are yet to come into my life, can be changed. And that's, I think, kind of an intuitive idea for people, is like, you come out of a relationship, you learn, you change, and then the next relationship is somehow called forth and fitted to you and meeting you in a different way to the last one. And at a kind of strange psychedelic spiritual level, I sometimes would imagine that each relationship is a meeting of the divine. That I am, each woman that I've loved is a expression of the divine in all of its particularity. But then there's also this way in which they're not totally separate. And then it's kind of like the fabric of life is like bending around and meeting each other in this iteration, and then breaking apart, and then it's coming together and meeting in this iteration. And there's this kind of continuity between all of those as well. And there's something quite beautiful about that, in my opinion.
I agree. I think continuity is a really interesting word there, and quite potentially insightful when it comes to thinking about what to do in very mundane, worldly ways. Because the thing that often happens, I think, for most of us a lot of the time, and particularly in the world of politics, for example, or the way that society is organized, is that lessons are learned from prior experiences that really apply to those prior experiences, and then they're mapped out in the world in relation to new things. So we're always solving the old problems in a new theatre, and therefore we've got the perfect solution to a problem that's no longer there. And then we have to go around and fix the mess we made as a result of applying the wrong solution. And I remember as a journalist watching this stuff happen, again and again in foreign policy contexts, and just that was what radicalized me into quitting my job and thinking I just can't be bothered to listen to this stuff anymore. But that was no solution either. That was my simplistic quest for purity, because the reality is that's what I was doing in my own particularly relationship situations. I would learn lessons from previous relationships, but I wasn't alive to what was actually there in my new relationship. I was seeing all the echoes of everybody else had ever been involved with, and therefore fighting ghosts or trying to appeal to characters who I hadn't met for 20 years instead of actually being really present with what was in front of me. And that's part of the nature of the meaning making system we've got between our ears. But I think we can get more skillful at manning the controls or personing the controls, to come back to where we were earlier.
Yeah, I mean, that clicks directly with my own experience. And I think that I think that this dynamic plays out everywhere to varying degrees, right? And there's extreme degrees of it, and that sort of like relational trauma and like projecting that onto your new relationships, or if you've not necessarily in a relationship, any kind of deeply adverse experience you've had that is unresolved then becomes the lens through which you see the world and interpret it. And if we're talking about like the reactive political gender sexual culture, part of that has to be that there's a lot of unresolved hurt and imbalances in the air that then get projected onto. And so how are we going to resolve this? There's so much complexity, there's so much difficulty being foisted at this intersection between men and women, basically. And how is that going to happen if men are just talking about the football and having these relationships that not only don't disclose the true nature of self, but actively suppress and keep everything in this blanket of sameness and banality. And that, that's a recipe for things staying as they are. Whereas having more conversations that are this kind of opening, this kind of, as we kind of set our intention at the beginning of this, of like getting to somewhere where we can see things a little differently, that's not only corrective, but kind of enabling of that very difficult process that's playing out through all of us, through all masculine, feminine, male, female, what have you, combinations. This change is happening, and how can we relate to the entire relational fabric of our lives in a way that supports that a little bit more? And that seems really worthwhile.
I hear you.
I see that, I see the struggle of, I went to visit an old friend a little while back, and speaking of like mapping your past, I had this awful experience of like seeing him in a relationship situation he was in, and I was just seeing it totally through the lens of where I had been years ago in a relationship where I was poorly supported and with a kind of bipolar-esque woman who I, deeply loved and so on. And just seeing that's a lived reality that's playing out behind closed doors, that's where the divine is living, is in those relationships, in those homes, and playing out those realities. And even at the subtler level, we've come from a culture in which that kind of inquiry, or even the notion of inquiry, was not welcome. So that was to stir up the nest. And we came from a culture that had a kind of fixed sense of where things were and who we were. And so we'd marry, and obviously people changed over time, but I don't think there was this sense of mutual unfoldment and not really knowing who we are, and having to heal generational things, and all of that is kind of new on the stage, and we're learning as we go.
I think each generation opens up to new possibilities, and perhaps also doesn't necessarily keep tabs of some of the old lessons at the same time. So we're forgetting things all the time, as well as discovering wonderful new things. But I feel also moved to note that amongst men there can be deeply supportive and powerfully reliable and comforting friendships that don't do any of this stuff that we're talking about. And that's what most people through most of history have depended on, this capacity to just be there for one another in some way. But it doesn't necessarily involve inquiry, no. In fact, there's a different way in which sort of all the boundaries can be opened up and explored that most people are much more familiar with, certainly growing up in the UK at least, of relentlessly taking the piss. These days apparently sort of classified under the heading of banter or bants, I think, just sort of don't take anything too seriously, constantly undermine all your mates, make fun of them, and everybody's got a nickname and a terrible anecdote that they desperately hope you won't keep bringing up, but you do. And so there's this way in which bonds are formed, almost trauma bonds in that way. I'm comfortably abused by familiar people, and that's friendship. And at the same time, people are there for each other. And so I remember my teenage years, a lot of that going on, and seeing a lot of people I knew from those times still having those kinds of friendships. I don't know what else they're up to because I don't know them very well anymore. But I do know that when I wanted to talk sometimes in my life about deep feelings, I was sometimes mocked. One of the sort of prevailing ways in which people would mock each other, certainly when I was growing up, was to cast aspersions on your sexuality. That's a bit gay. a bit
gay
girly. Exactly. And I didn't really care about that, but I didn't find too many people who wanted to talk about deeper feelings, or some did in a very intellectual way. Others did in a sort of let's get stoned and contemplate deeper meaning of things sort of a way, but less in, as I say, in the way that I became more and more tuned in to being able to do with women. And weirdly, I went to an all-boys school, so the only people I had to talk to during the day, all day, were guys. And yet it turned out to be women to whom I opened up, maybe because my defenses were up at school, and because I wasn't actually normally socialized with women. So all manner of other elements we could sort of consider in coming to that conclusion. But broadly speaking, I do think you're right. I just felt moved to complexify it a touch.
Yeah. No, I love the dialectic here, because that's also very true as well. And I think that, like, personally for me, I do have a handful of those kinds of relationships that are immensely valuable to me, and people I've bonded with at whatever early stage. And it just feels like those friendships, like I've got a best mate from school and I've got a best mate from university, and it's not really about inquiry as such or mutual unfoldment, but there is also some room for that. I mean, just insofar as I have always relentlessly sought to show up as my latest self in these relationships, and they have changed to varying degrees, but insofar as I've just kept doing that, and they have accepted me, and we've continued to relate, then I'm not particularly boxed in. It's not necessarily about having an expectation from them of being on the frequencies that I'm on, but they see me and they see me changing and growing, and I see them, and we're still able to connect, and that's really meaningful. And I like to have those because they offer a continuity, and what we were saying before, continuity of who you were then through to who you are now, that only the people you shared those experiences with can you have that.
I hear you. And if I'm honest, I think with some of the friends who I was closer to when I was younger, who I've kept in touch with, there was a phase I went through where perhaps you used the word frequency. I think as I got more and more into yoga and meditation, and had various experiences and came to various conclusions, or at least sort of tentative ideas about things that felt insightful, I think held up my inquiry from a position of assumed superiority sometimes, almost looking down on the inferiority of not engaging in this stuff. And I think I annoyed various of my friends quite a bit over the years with that sort of manner, not really intending to be arrogant or spiritually materialist, saying I've accomplished some great trinkets that you're all envious of, but at the same time a bit too caught up in myself. So they would have said I was taking myself too seriously, not in the sense of wanting to pull me down to size for some barroom banter, but more just get over yourself, mate. Thought this stuff was about getting beyond your ego. Yours seems to be swelling a touch. And I think over the years I've really had to look at that very differently, and to realize that if insight isn't helping us to become just more content and comfortable with the reality of the world as it is, while at the same time seeing all the things that might be improved in it, then I don't know how insightful it is. Sometimes it feels to me like just another attempt to project a new, better polished self-image out in front of ourselves to, sort of dance towards in the hope that we might actually become it. Because in the end, the world's messy, and all of our idealistic fantasies about how it should be are going to crash against the rocks, because that's just sadly the nature of reality. We might touch the stars once in a while, but if it was as simple as making all of our wonderful fantasies come true like that, then surely it would have happened by now. Instead, there are magical moments and wonderful contexts in which these things can happen. But for the most part, there's just the miracle by which billions of people manage to coexist without slitting each other's throats all day, every day. And thankfully, that's still rare enough to be thought about as an atrocity rather than standard practice. So people do have some inherent self-restraint and goodness, regardless of whether they're engaged in these paths or not. But more richness can be brought to life by inquiring. I wholeheartedly agree. And so I wouldn't want to imply anything other than that. And in some ways, I think the spirit of even just talking in this way is to inquire. We don't really know where it's going at all. We haven't got an agenda. There's not this house believes and me saying yay and you saying nay, or some other debating format where we're not really trying to advance one point of view and try and hobble it over the finish line somewhere to say nailed it. We're just talking and seeing what comes up, and it's actually an uncomfortable space to be in for a lot of people, me included. Sometimes I like to pin things down. I like to have everything wrapped up in pithy phrases. I used to be a journalist, for goodness sake. Who else puts things in boxes more readily than journalists? So I think there's a need to bring more of that inquiry into public life generally, but a real challenge and potential resistance to being able to do so, particularly in a country like this one that doesn't have a written constitution, that's structured on a legal system based on adversarial point scoring and has a sort of cartoon Punch and Judy show instead of a parliamentary chamber. So I really see the potential, and at the same time the limitations because of the way we are organized. And I wonder, given that you're so immersed in the practice of inquiry-based dialogue, what sort of potential you see for spreading this out into the more mundane realms of the way that the world is run, rather than amongst sincere seekers after truth.
I don't know.
It's a really good answer. I think that's the
I am
essence.
deeply agnostic at this point. I've certainly gone through waves, and even in that sort of David Bohm piece that you read and previous bits I've written on Dialogos, I've certainly advocated and expressed a vision for a possibility. And there's something that feels very true about that. It feels fundamentally true to me that we are sense-making beings, and that relationship is the fundamental fabric between us, and dialogue and communication is that fundamental fabric. And so the extent to which we can transform our relationship to that fundamental fabric between us, the possibility of a shift in consciousness seems very real. And it's real because I've experienced it, and I'm experiencing it with various people, and it's all somehow happening under this rubric of emergence. Nobody's planning or conspiring for this to happen, but people are being drawn together, and there's a self-organizing quality to that. And everybody in these various spaces, sense-making, metamodernism, existential risk concern people, and game B, and there's all kinds of different ones, but basically seeing that the way things are going is off a cliff edge, or as Terence McKenna would say, a fire in a madhouse. And seeing that there is a much more wholesome way of operating in relationship to profound complexity that seems to hopefully couple with reality more effectively. And that would be something like wisdom, that being coupled and conformed with the world in a way that makes you more fitted. And that doesn't have to be in a highfalutin, big change way. It can be in a very local, netted way of your immediate relationships. But insofar as that principle holds, then I think that the emergent process can continue to happen at a fractal level. And so it's not about a top-down initiation of change or even a bottom-up initiation of change. It's something in between the two. It's something like a mycelial fabric spreading in throughout the whole of the sort of holographic web of life. And it's really on faith on some level, that like how that's operating and where it's going, and that it has a teleology and directionality towards something more beautiful, a more elegant organization of all of our organisms. That's on faith, but we're following our intuition, and we're following where is leading towards more meaning and wisdom and love. And so I'm certainly not of the hope of collective enlightenment, collective awakening. I'm somewhere between the two. I'm somewhere between, like, there's a web of care and concern that can emerge that's just sufficient to get us to pass the ball forward through the eye of the needle into the next phase of the human journey. And that doesn't have to be everyone in order for it to occur. It just has to somehow have that webbing quality that's binding reality back together, and at the same time evolving the potential of what it means to be human. And then, of course, that if it is true that it couples us with reality better, if it ends up producing good art, then that will trickle out and it will transform culture. And looking out at the saturation of bullshit in our culture, as John Vervaeke says, there's not too much to compete with. I think there is a yearning at this time for something more meaningful, and I certainly see that coming through in culture right now. There's such a profound flourishing of these kinds of philosophical dialogue communities, and you know, religiosity, that kind of deeper need is definitely coming through in Western culture more and more. So
connection to something bigger than us, or at least a sense that there is something more than just a greedy little monster between the ears saying, I want.
Yeah. And that, I think, is self-justifying. If it's true, if you feel it, then it's the thing that would make it all worth it in some way, and is certainly a great response to the problem of death that we all face.
Well, exactly. And I think this is where I come back to. I mean, speaking about yoga philosophy, it was really, basically in some ways, preparation for death, and in the most extreme, manifestations of it, fast forwarding towards it with no concern. Humanity seems to be doing that. So if any kind of system of thought has got something to offer the current predicament, it would be that. But it can be quite bleak. It can sound nihilistic, and a lot of it isn't relationally organized. And I suppose behind my question about what form this sort of dialogue might take in a broader context was familiarity with various processes that activist friends of mine have been involved with, particularly citizens' assemblies, and being genuinely surprised at the way in which the people who participated in those, a bit like as if they'd been called for jury service, weren't deeply resentful of the wasting of their time on boring subjects, but were actually genuinely fascinated by things that they felt empowered to ask questions about and interrogate and push towards some sort of conclusion, even if it was ultimately completely disregarded by anybody with any power. And that seemed to be affirmative and exactly the opposite of my own experience of student politics, which made me want to run a mile and have nothing more to do with that sort of world. And it doesn't make me excited about a future in which everything is localized and the people's standing committee of my little corner of the world will get together to bore each other rigid with Hegelian dialectic all too often. I guess stripping back from that, though, there is just the lived reality of interrelationship, as we keep coming back to. And for most people, the unit in which that fundamentally exists without question is, on the one hand, the family, and on the other hand, the workplace. And those are the sort of little nodes of human organization that most people are plugged into. But there are so many others as well that we willingly engage with through our interests or free time activities or other ways of sharing our gifts with the world. And perhaps some of those take on a new quality the more we invest in them. And I guess that's where I'm trying to sort of align myself now with you talked about perhaps trust or faith. Sincerely jumping forwards into that little hole in the needle that you alluded to, trying to just somehow squeeze myself through it, but with enough momentum that there's actually a possibility for me in my own little limited world, in my own little limited way, in this limited mind and body for however long I've got left in this incarnation, to just flourish really. If it all means we face death dancing, smiling, hugging, and loving, that will be better than slitting our neighbors' throats, so at least they went before us.
Goodness. Yeah. I have to say, I've just started reading a biography of the city of Jerusalem. The opening chapter is about Roman Emperor Titus crushing the Jewish rebellion in AD 70 and crucifying like tens of thousands of rebels, and they crucified so many people that there wasn't enough wood to crucify them anymore, and every hill was. And so I'm just fucking shocked at the degree of brutality, and the language you're using evokes that for me, and it does remind that things have come some way along from just 2,000 years ago, but also
not. I mean, I spent time in my 20s living in southeastern Europe, where there had recently been brutal conflict, and once again war happening within continental Europe in a similar sort of a way, perhaps a little less internecine and neighborly, but in some ways exactly that. It's very similar to what happened in Bosnia, what happens in Ukraine. So I realize we've been very lucky to live where we live. For a lot of people, brutality is a daily fact of life, and we're privileged to not have been subjected to that. And I suppose I chose those words particularly provocatively, really, just to think about, what might it be to be under that pressure when it really is, everything up against the line? And do you just go along with the prevailing mood of brutality, or are you able to resist smiling, even if that means you're going to be gunned down at dawn for not going along with the program? I would like to think I was going to do that. Whether I could or not, I have no idea. I'm sure I'd be terrified and cowering in the corner. But I don't wish to try and paint life in these sort of terribly stark terms just for the sake of it, I do think, as you've pointed out, we're in a mess as a civilization, and it's hard to see a fruitful future that is actively being nurtured by those who've got the capacity to make it happen, and all sorts of other good ideas of what could be done that have never been taken anywhere worth talking about. And so, it doesn't look great. And therefore, I think we do come back to how do we relate to those around us, because that might become a very important question.
Yeah, you just the imagery coming up for me as you were speaking about these citizens' assemblies and power and powerlessness. And what comes for me is the recognition that the world of reality, like in some sense, it's about our interpretation of what power is, and whether it is what the people who hold the power believe it is. And if we're living in the world of the WEF or what have you, and that's actually how reality is, then
could I just intervene? Having been to the World Economic Forum, I think they're a bit overplayed in the current, state of the world drama.
I agree. That was just a substitute. It was just a lightly thrown in term.
Sorry,
really,
I couldn't resist.
Elite, powerful interests, but they don't hold the keys to the future. None of us do. And I think the more deeply we're seeing this time, we're seeing that there's a profound change afoot, and there's a dissolution of much of what was assumed to be firm, including even work and family. There's much talk of tens of millions of workers no longer being required as workers. And so this is demanding of a radical reimagining of what is this world about? What does it mean to participate? Where does our worth come from? And that's just one instance. You have AI also just ready to drip through and disrupt everything it touches in a profound fashion. And then you also have the psychedelic renaissance bubbling up in a spiritual context and also in a clinical context, and that's a boundary dissolving catalyst of huge possibility. But as you say, even in seeing all of that, we can go way out, and we can get up in the stars and ungrounded. And I think the challenge for curious and visionary types today is to both go out and to come back down, and to somehow be holding the ropes between the two with integrity, seeing all that you can see, everything that is changing, everything that is possible, and at the same time seeing where things are at and seeing the reality that people live in and the way that they understand the world and the kinds of conversations that constitute their lives, and not discrediting that and not feeling above it, and learning to move with it and work with it. And I do think that we can reimagine power. And there's a woman called Mina Salami who's written about this, and really thinking of power as something flowing through us rather than something we have over others. And I think there is a way in which this binding together is also about resilience and figuring out ways to increase our autonomy from the structures that be. And as we do that, the possibility of what can change, I think, will increase a lot, and the demands on us will be progressively increased as the structures that need to crumble.
I think, therefore, really, but it all comes down to meaning, really. We try to make meaning out of the confusing web of stuff around us, and sometimes we tell ourselves all sorts of stories that perhaps don't really stack up, but they're very persuasive and can often bring all sorts of people along on all sorts of adventures. But what we're really looking for is a deeper meaning of what it is just to be alive, to be human, to be here now, to be fully embodied, and to try and make the most of this life before it slips through our fingers. And we've all got different ideas of what that might be, and often the realm of ideas isn't where it's at, I think. And I suppose that's the potential, I think, of contemplative practice, whatever form it might take. Something as simple as just actually tuning in to what one feels in the body, even just while having a conversation with somebody else, without it even being a formal meditation practice, already accesses a deeper level of wisdom, just in terms of what you actually feel, and how much of the response is just about one's own stuff rather than what one's encountering from another. And so I guess, the degree to which people are curious about the reality in front of us will be the extent to which we have some greater potential to make more of it. And so for that reason, I'm inspired by a lot of what I see around me. I don't think it's all necessarily bleak, even if the ultimate trajectory of human existence, might not necessarily be a never-ending upward flourishing towards the stars, or perhaps might one day, go up in a big blaze of flames. Who knows? But whether or not that's the case is irrelevant. Is really all I'm trying to say. What matters is here and now, and what I have the power to affect here and now is, I suppose, how I relate to myself and how I relate to what's in front of me and the people who are around me, and through those connections out into other aspects of life. And so I'm trying to discipline myself more and more to pay attention to that, rather than what I used to do, which was to get lost in either being very angry about why things were the way that they were, or delusionally invested in alternatives that I had no way of making reality.
That middle way kind of bring us back to the beginning of this conversation. There's a ditch on both sides of the road and the banks of the river, and somehow kind of seeking to find that balance and flow through the middle way. And there's so many different metaphors that we can draw upon to situate ourselves, but ultimately it's not about ideas, concepts, as much as it is about participation.
It's relationships, really. I've spent a lot of my life not investing in them properly, and the yoga of relationships is now my practice, with myself, with my partner, with others around me, with whatever I find myself part of, really. If that's all it amounts to, I'll consider that a worthwhile investment.
Amen. Thank you very much, Daniel.
Thank you, Jacob. It's a real pleasure to talk to you.
Likewise.